This was the biggest story that NYU journalism has had to cover. It was the biggest story that any of us have covered, and hopefully the biggest story that we will ever cover. And immediately after the attacks, it was obvious that considering NYU is so close to the World Trade Centers, was so close to the World Trade Centers, that we needed to do something about it.
Cataclysmic event. First attack by hijacked planes. Both towers of the World Trade Center have collapsed. Firefighters and their police trying to evacuate the area as quickly as possible.
These two 110-story towers just collapsing into the ground.
The World Trade Center is now gone.
This year, when September 11th came round, none of us were ready to remember what happened in such great detail. I certainly wasn't.
For me, it was just too much to deal with the loss again on a personal level a year later. And though journalists are meant to dissociate themselves from the story, it was very hard for all of us because we were part of the story.
I really did not want to do anything about September 11th and was very unprepared to do anything about it. I was actually surprised because I didn't expect the story to change so much. So it was a good thing because I learnt a lot about revisiting. Our class went back to retell the stories that we had visited last year, while students who had just started on the program went to cover events that were happening on the anniversary day.
I hadn't been in New York last year and I didn't know my way around. So I was actually quite nervous about covering it and really didn't want to cover it. But once we went out and started, people were so receptive and open and welcoming that it took all of that away.
I know.
We went out to the West Side Highway to a group that calls themselves Point Thank You. And what it is a group that had been going out and holding up thank you signs for the rescue workers that were coming in and out of Ground Zero. And since it was the 1-year anniversary, they decided to come back. They had bought a little television set and we're all gathered around this television set for the moment of silence. The silence was deafening. At one point I actually had to stop shooting because it was emotional, and I myself started crying.
The first day, I was in shock. The first day, I broke down sobbing when the towers collapsed. It didn't matter that I was studying journalism. I honestly didn't want to cover it then. It was actually nice going out this year because this year, not only are you 1 year removed from the horror of it, but this year, I wasn't fumbling with the camera.
The day after the Trade Center attacks, we took our cameras down West Street. It was the main artery for the rescue effort, and with most of Lower Manhattan shut down, it became a place for people to congregate. This is where we met Kathy Capsuto. On the 11th, she saw the horror. On the 12th, she saw something else.
But I see this amazing sense of people just being, the generosity, that people don't believe New Yorkers are like that, but I really believe that New Yorkers, when you're in need, people are there for you. And there is a sense that we might be able to be helpful here. We have a restaurant, we just fed all these Con Ed crews here. And that felt really good that I could somehow turn around and give back.
The The restaurant is Capsuto Frere, housed in this red and yellow brick building, 1 block below Canal Street. Owned by her husband and his 2 brothers, the restaurant opened in Tribeca in 1980 and was a pioneer in the area. The day after the attack, Jacques Capsuto, the eldest brother, was the first one in the restaurant.
I make 6 pots of coffees, and I go out on the street and I tell, there was Con Edison was right outside, so I go and I see them, so I tell the guys, I have fresh coffee and I have bathroom at 7 o'clock in the morning. At 8 o'clock my chef calls me. Do I come? I say, yes, you're coming.
But police barricades kept Chef Pascal from getting past West Houston.
And suddenly I see an unmarked police car coming up, and who's in the back is Jack. So he's like, that's my chef, that's my chef. So I was able to come through, and then Jack said, well, let's cook, let's do some food.
And we cooked for about 30 people, and then 100 people showed up. So we're already jumping, busy, scrambling. But it felt great anyway.
And then we started getting better at it.
And then we did, at dinner, we cooked for 250 people. And then we went on and we continued. We did that for 17 days.
A year later, on September 13th, Capsuto hosted a reunion banquet.
These are guys I work for.
This was the group that fixed a destroyed power grid serving almost half of Lower Manhattan.
Anywhere up to 150 people here on any given day in the area on this block working. And you open up their doors and their family and their love to everybody from Con Edison, the fire department, and the police department. You know, and they made it feel like home.
Capsuto is also home to the matriarch of the family, Eva, who helped with the effort.
Right, and I was at 12 o'clock, I was called everybody to come to eat lunch, right? And what it was 6 o'clock, I was called outside to call everybody to come to eat the dinner. It was breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Well, I only had dinner, I don't know.
Capsuto was also the site of community board meetings those first few weeks after the attack. Albert Capsuto, who designed the restaurant 22 years ago, was with his brother the entire time.
At least we knew what we had to do. I think psychologically, it was very important for the area to have that. An area where people could come and start relating to each other and start talking and having neighbors talk to workers, policemen who talk to neighbors. A place that lended itself to the area not becoming a ghost town, especially after the first week.
After those first 17 days, the restaurant reopened, and October 2001's Restaurant Week helped bring customers below Canal Street and back to the restaurant. But much of their regular customer base was gone. Today, the restaurant is back in business because the Capsuto brothers learned to do things differently.
We started catering to the neighborhood, people who live in the neighborhood, so we reduced our prices, and we're very aggressive. We advertise, we push, we do functions. And a lot of people heard of what we did, and they come to give us thanks.
This family sowed the seeds of their own restaurant's recovery in those first few days after the attack. This year, we met with Kathy Capsuto once again, along with her husband, Sammy.
Having that opportunity to help others helped us.
They became part of a new neighborhood, and 1 year later, they chose to honor their new friends 2 days after September 11th.
Because on the 11th is a commemoration of the event. This is a commemoration of the recovery effort after the event.
We made a lot of new friends. It created a new normal.
I found this piece of paper with your address on it, so I've mailed it back to you. I thought you might need some of the numbers. They seemed private. I don't know you, but hi. I found it in my flower box. I found your name in my ivy.
This is very not politically correct at all, but I do feel that we have prioritized violence and that the American lives are worth so much more than anywhere else in the world.
Frankly, I would sometimes hear students from other countries in my class say things that really upset me. And over time, I had more of an appreciation for what other people in my class from other countries were saying about America's response to the so-called war.
September 11th happened 3 days after we started journalism school. We were just thrown into this enormous story and had to figure out how to cover it. I was asked to tell the story of the firefighters in the West Village.
The firehouse on West 10th Street is closed. Squad 18 has lost so many men that the firehouse is shut down.
I spoke to Dennis Smith, who is a well-known firefighter and author.
Tells the story of Staten Island Rescue 5.
The day crew was already working assigned. They was, it was 8:45. The night crew was still there in the firehouse. It was 8:45. They get off at 9. All 12 of those men got on that fire truck. And not only that, but there was a lieutenant who had stopped by on his way somewhere else. It was a day off. And he stopped by the firehouse to have a cup of coffee with the guys. So there are 13 firefighters there, when ordinarily there would have been 6. And of course, all 13 were missing.
So this year I was asked to go back and do the firefighter story again a year later. And it was good to be there when they were having moments of reflection.
From Staten Island, we saw a changed Manhattan. On the anniversary, family and friends gathered to commemorate their loss. 343 firefighters died. That number is large for us, but individual for them.
Changed our life forever, 9/11. We lost 3 of our own men. They are the true heroes. They gave their life for another fellow human being. You can't ask any more than that. We're never going to forget, and we hope the public never forgets.
Staten Island firefighters chose to be together to mark the anniversary. There is a unity amongst the people who were at Ground Zero, but with shared experiences, there is shared trauma.
We were digging for 5 days, on September 11th to the 15th. Some people that are complaining that they still have trouble sleeping at night. I've had my share of not sleeping, but I try to be tougher than that if I can.
But not everyone can tough it out.
What we're seeing is social isolation, increase in alcohol use, increase in substance abuse, interpersonal problems, irritability, all of those kinds of things.
St. Vincent's was well prepared to deal with the psychological trauma. It's one of the closest hospitals to Ground Zero. After 9/11, St. Vincent sent therapists to firehouses. At first, New York's bravest were suspicious.
A lot of the uniform officers didn't believe in psychiatry, felt the stigma of seeking services. They didn't want to feel vulnerable because they're in a position of authority and not in a position of vulnerability.
After a year, the therapists developed a trust and helped firefighters, but the firehouses themselves are changing. The authority within firehouses is in flux. Many commanders were killed on September 11th, and retirements are up 60% from last year. The FDNY is losing 1/4 of its leadership, and firefighters must deal with a whole new trauma.
When the Trade Center was attacked, that was it. That really was, you see things that you never want to see in life again. That's more or less, people go to war, they carry war scars. Well, this is definitely like a war scar that's going to be carried for the rest of our lives.
when September 11th came round, we had had one broadcast lesson and had been filming sandwiches in the park and going, ooh, look, this is in focus, aren't we clever? And suddenly we got given cameras and told to go out and shoot. We went to Bed-Stuyvesant to cover the Muslim, what was anticipated as a Muslim backlash. Last Monday was not a usual day at the mosque. Members of the police force and Muslim leaders gathered to find ways with open arms by the Muslim community leaders who invited us into the mosque.
Muslims are not terrorists. Muslims are not terrorists. Muslims are not terrorists.
When we went back this year, the community was so suspicious of journalists. One man threatened to break our camera if we didn't stop filming the mosque. So it made for a very interesting story.
Stand over there with your camera in front of the store away from the masjid.
Last year, it was easy to speak to people on the street.
As a woman, it's more noticeable to see a Muslim female than a Muslim man, because a female would dress in certain garb, so it's easy for them to pick up that a female is a Muslim.
This year, Mohammed, who works in a religious store, had to get permission from neighborhood security before he could talk to us. A new immigrant from Egypt, Mohammed says he feels marginalized by US foreign policy.
Actually, we see no reason to America beat up the Iraq again. I don't understand it this way. Even Afghanistan, even Osama bin Laden, they have no proof about all these things, and just to go all over to beat up the people like this. You know, it's not right. What happened 9/11 is not right, and what they do now is not right.
Before we left his shop, Mohammed sold us this videotape. The tape alleges that President Bush carried out the attacks on the World Trade Center. Although widely watched among the Muslim community, the tape is not made by Muslims, but by an American called Anthony Helder.
Do you really think that this man has the capacity to lead? Or is he simply following orders? Orders from the Faustian financial fraternity that controls this country.
The tape is based on little evidence, broad generalizations, and it alleges that America is run by a secret society called the Illuminati, made up of the government elite. The tape is on sale outside the local mosque. I was surprised at how popular this tape was in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and I wondered why people here felt so marginalized by US foreign policy. Could it be because Bedford-Stuyvesant is a community made up of new immigrants from Africa? It is generally working class and has high unemployment. I wondered, do all Muslims feel this way? We went to find the answer in Brooklyn Heights, a very different community. On Atlantic Avenue, you see a diversity of people. We spoke to Dennis Hallaby, whose family has owned the Damascus Bakery for 3 generations.
Early 1900s, my grandfather was actually one of the first settlers on Atlantic Avenue, and the boat landed down the block, and actually all Syrians landed on this avenue. So basically, this area was strictly Middle Eastern. Within the last 20 years, it became very integrated. We got a lot of mix.
This past year, Dennis Hallaby has had a different experience compared to the Muslims in Bedford-Stuyvesant.
When it first happened, my telephone lines were down for about a month, and a lot of the customers that were Americans came by just to make sure that everything was, you know, there was no problems.
Americans, like Dennis Hallaby's customers, participated in a Muslim solidarity march held in Brooklyn Heights. The march took place on the anniversary of 9/11.
We've all lived here for years, and we've lived together as an Arab and American community, and it's very important to our identity, and we're all so proud of it.
But even in the vigil on the promenade, we still found Muslim leaders who believed in the tape.
If you really want to know something about crooked George Bush, that tape tell you everything about him.
Do you believe all of it?
Oh yes. Anything that it says about Bush, I believe it.
But it imputes the attacks of the World Trade Center to George Bush.
Uh-huh.
And not to Al-Qaeda?
No. 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 I blame him for every taste of this.
Although September 11th polarized Muslims in New York, some communities have embraced a new sense of unity and empathy.
Shaking hands, saying how do you do? What they're really saying is I love you.
I felt compelled to cover this as well as possible, so I really think that it raised the standard for not only what stories we covered, but how we covered it.
I think for us it was a very good experience, at least for me it was a very good experience, to learn how to deal with events of such emotion. And hopefully we won't have to deal with it again, but if we do, I think we are a little bit more prepared because of it.